People often tell me fond memories of their very first apartment. They would say it's a great turning point in one's lifetime. I suppose I can see how some people would think that. A chance to move out of the nest and have a place to call your own. A personal sanctuary from the outside world. A safe place. For me, however, that wasn't necessarily the case. I had just recently graduated high school and was encouraged by my parents to seek out a new place to live. When I say encouraged, they basically told me to either pay rent or get out. Back then, I was nervous, but excited to finally branch out and find a place for myself. Although it seemed like I worked nonstop at my job making coffee, my paycheck limited my options on places to live. I spent months wading through locations. Some places were dirt cheap and it showed. However, bars on the windows made me feel less safe than their intended purposes, I'm sure. Other locations would have you inherit a small fortune to take up residence in their prestigious lodgings. It was beginning to feel like the more I searched, the bleaker my options became, until I stumbled across this complex on the edge of town. The rent was just within my range, and after doing a quick walkthrough, I was sold. The first month or so living there was actually fantastic. I have been told by family and friends that complexes usually make the apartment appear much nicer for the new tenant until they move in, and shortly after, all the problems start making themselves known. It wasn't until my second month that I started to pick up on the small issues that began to arise. For instance, the ceiling fan in my living room started to make a horrendous screech if it was left on for too long. The faucets would leak if you didn't turn the knob with the strength of 1,000 men. But I think the biggest annoyance I began facing was the issue in my bedroom. For some odd reason, my bedroom was the hottest room in my entire apartment. And no, I don't mean that as a pun. Simply walking from the living room to my bedroom felt like a transition from Arctic to desert. It didn't take me too long to surmise that the reason my room felt like the sun had to do with the air vent, located near the ceiling in my room. I walked over to it, raising my hand near the grate, and didn't even feel a single twinge of air emanating from it. I figured I would just contact the main office and request they send out a maintenance guy to solve the problem. However, when I phoned the front office, their previously kind demeanor seemed to shift once I finally became a tenant. It seemed like they completely stopped caring once they filled the vacancy. I was told that since the rest of my apartment had air conditioning, that it wasn't labeled an emergency, and that they would send someone out when it was convenient for them. Hearing that explanation almost sent me into a rage, but luckily I managed to hang up the phone before shouting obscenities at it. Once I was finally able to calm down enough, I took it upon myself to attempt to solve the problem. While I suppose it technically wasn't an emergency and I could have just slept in the living room, I wanted to check and see if it was an easy fix, such as opening the vent shutters. After retrieving a chair and climbing on it, I was finally able to get a good look at the vent itself. I wasn't surprised to find the vent shutters were open. There was just no air coming out of it. I'm not entirely sure what brought about this next series of thoughts, but my mind began to drift to the conclusion of a large animal stuck in the vents, like a raccoon or a nest of rats. These thoughts made my hands shake as I gently gripped the edges of the vent. With my eyes shut, I gave the vent a few swift tugs before it finally gave way and I almost lost my balance on the chair. A soft thud sounded from the ground beneath me as I could only imagine that the animal had fallen out of the vent. Opening my eyes, I checked the area below me. I was shocked and a bit confused by what I found that was tucked away in my vents. It was a cloth of some kind, which appeared to be wrapped around something. Picking it up and unraveling it, I discovered that it was in fact an old VHS tape. I'll admit, this was probably the last thing I expected to find inside the air vent. I had been so caught up in the mystery of what was in my vent that I hadn't even noticed the now ice-cold air blasting out of the unobstructed vent near my head. I placed the cover back onto the wall hopped off the chair and began inspecting the tape a bit more. There were no markings on it, or any indications that it belonged to someone. I'll be honest, I don't think I ever actually held a VHS tape in my hands. At least no times I can remember. I know that probably sounds sad to some of you, but we all come from different generations. If you think finding a VHS tape in your air vent is strange, you should try calling around town looking for a VCR. After hours of searching and phoning stores, I got lucky when a pawn shop I called happened to have one in stock. I made my way over to the shop immediately. I managed to get the VCR for around $40, which I probably overpaid for, but my curiosity was in desperate need of sating. I rushed home as quickly as I could, and spent almost an hour trying to hook up such an ancient device to my high-definition TV. At that point, the sun had fully descended. Once I had everything set up, I grabbed the tape, holding it for a moment while I thought about what might be on it. It had to be something good, I thought. Or why else would someone go to such lengths to hide it? I put the tape in the slot and waited for it to play. For around a minute or two, the screen on my TV showed nothing but static. The longer I watched, the more irritated I became at shelling out $40 that I could have spent on food. I was just about to press the eject button when the image suddenly changed. The TV flickered for a moment before an image of a woman appeared on the screen. The video was in black and white, but from what I could tell, the woman was sitting alone in a room. She had long dark hair that hung loosely over her face, and she wore a somewhat tattered white dress. My first impression of this tape was that someone had attempted to recreate the tape from the movie The Ring, and hid it away for some gullible person to find it and be terrorized by it. I smirked and mockingly said to myself, 7 days. Just then, the girl on the tape spoke. The audio was somewhat corrupted by the poor condition of the tape, but it sounded like she said, "Help me." Those words actually caught me off guard. I was expecting this woman to say something along the lines of, "I'm going to eat your face," or something to that effect. Hearing those two words completely changed my disposition towards her. I watched the film more intently and tried to make out what she was saying as best I could. Through the static, I could only make out a few vague statements. "He's going to kill us. I fear for my daughter. I've tried to seek help, but no one will listen." Even though the video was heavily distorted, I could almost feel the pain and fear this woman was going through. The tape continued for a few more minutes before she said one final thing. One thing that sent a jolt of ice throughout my body. "He's here." With that, the tape cut out and I was left in dark silence. I wasn't sure how to process all this information. I decided that it would probably be best if I just reported this to the police. The next morning, I made my way to the police station and informed them of what I had found. After reviewing the tape and questioning me, the detectives informed me that many years ago, a small family had just moved into a recently built apartment complex. After receiving a missing persons report, the detectives investigated the complex. When they arrived, they found a man living in the apartment. But when they inquired about his wife and kid, he simply told the police that they had an argument. She took the kid, left, and he hadn't seen her since. When the police went back a month later for follow-up questions, the entire apartment was empty and vacated, so the case was eventually closed. The police thanked me for this evidence and I was sent home. Shortly after that incident, I moved out of the apartment and moved back in with my parents. I decided that was the best option considering my situation. I've always wondered why I happened to be the one person to find the tape. Surely others had lived in the apartment before me. Maybe the tape got jostled during the renovations before I moved in. Or maybe something else moved the tape. I'm not entirely sure. People often have fond memories of their very first apartment. For me, the only thing I can think about is that woman probably died in the very spot I was watching the tape from, and that the man who killed her and probably their daughter is still alive and is still out there somewhere.